Sure that we don't forget about this one. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to session 3 of the business CFOs Leading Business Intelligence workshop series. So it's a series of 5. We gave the first session, we gave a little bit of an introduction. The second session, we talked a little bit more in depth on what is business intelligence, what is business modeling specifically. And already last time we felt a little bit, okay, there's also the right tools need to be there. And from that perspective, we're then jumping today into business intelligence tools. So my name is Tim Wieringa. I'm a change management practitioner here in Singapore, and together with David Newton from Trinity in Hong Kong, we set up with a lot of friends and support with a lot of support from our friends. We set up this series, and I'm great to kick off the session today. Before I hand over to David and then to Eric, let's just quickly go through Paul. And before we go through that, Paul, I just want to highlight there's a Q&A session in case you have a question, you just want to quickly toss it down and we'll pick it up later, especially during the panel discussion. So the Q&A is on the bottom right. There's some triangle and circle and square, and if you click on that, there you find the Q&A session. Otherwise, use the chat, or otherwise unmute yourself and ask your question, just as we like that as well. So let's start with the initial poll. So we want to ask a little bit on how are you presenting your business intelligence information, your enterprise information to your C-suite executives. So we have 4 options here, and we're just curious to see which option do you prefer? So the first votes are coming in. And let's see what's coming there. David, it was really interesting choice of options, and when I saw it, I was expecting that everybody goes into one of those options, and I think that's where it's heading to. Good morning, Graham. We just started off a few minutes ago, and currently we are in a poll. I hope you can see the polls where we're asking what are the tools you're using to present your business intelligence, your business planning information to your C-suite executives. So please join us in voting there as well, Graham. So that's where we currently are. I'm almost surprised that the presentations which are not done in PowerPoint, and I can only support things are not done in PowerPoint, because I think we discussed that last time, and I definitely will go into that today again. Presenting in PowerPoint most probably means that you need to copy paste. This is effort, this is error prone, and maybe there are better ways to do that. But with that, I want to hand over to David. Let's see what we can do with business intelligence tools today.
Thanks very much, Tim. I mean, BI tools probably mean different things to all of us on this call when we just use that term. And there's 4 areas we're really going to explore today. Firstly, the use of BI tools to generate forecast entries. A lot of people are reliant on Excel and a lot of formulae in Excel, but as we will see shortly, if you have a central database, you can actually have some of the rules and drivers of your forecast defined and controlled centrally as well. So that can be quite transparent and easy to see. There's also a governance point. Sometimes, particularly large organizations may have a very heavy control process over forecasting and budgeting, and significant changes to previous forecasts or budgets may need to be approved at quite a senior level. So how do you manage that process? Again, if you have the right tools, it can all be linked in with your Outlook and those sort of things. The third area is going to be looking at how you can connect your business modeling dynamically to dashboards, so that maybe the way to run your presentation to the board or the C-suite executive is to crank up a dashboard that's dynamically linked to the central model, and you can kind of point and click during presentations as you go. So Eric's going to present on those 3 areas, and then I'll do a little bit on the end on how to visualize through a graphical interface non-financial data sets such as market research. So that'll be the little bit at the end, and then we'll have the about a 20-minute panel session with Harry. So with no further ado, I will hand over to Eric McVeigh, who you know from last week's session is a bit of a guru in this area, and he will take you through the how you can use business tools for generating forecasts and managing the process. Eric, over to you.
Thanks very much, David, and a warm welcome to everyone. I just wanted to just sort of start off there a bit ad hoc. So was that correct, Tim, that people are using PowerPoint out there as a presentation layer? Was that one of the results that came up? Because actually something we could tie into, we won't do it today, but we can actually feed the data into your PowerPoint, so you can have a generic slide deck and have the data automatically populate. So that just as an aside. So I'll get underway for today. And from the beginning. Okay, so today's focus, we're just going to take a bit of a run through what business intelligence tools we might have available, and how we can improve the budgeting process, but more importantly, leverage the value of the data and things that we want to be able to get out to the teams, and how we can express that in a way that's going to appeal to a wider audience. So we'll take a quick look to start with about how we can lighten the load a little bit. So we sort of touched on it last week, but we'll skim through it fairly quickly. But if we start off with a conventional spreadsheet, and the little spreadsheet we'll work with today actually has 500 odd cells in it. And we would have to maintain those 535 cells. Now, if we step up to a traditional BI tool, so some people last week mentioned that, you know, they might have some Hyperions and things like that lurking out there. It definitely lightens the load, and it sort of would reduce, in this particular little example, it'd bring it down to 85 odd cells, which represents a 84% reduction in the number of cells that we'd have to manage on a 6+6 forecast. The thing is, if we step up to a modern BI tool, and this is what we're going to go through, we can actually manage that forecast down to 17 cells. And that's really a 97% reduction. You know, it's a simple model, but you get the idea that by leveraging the tool, we can sort of improve the way that we work. So what's an example here? I'm going to cut across to the actual spreadsheet. So this is connected to the engine in the back end, like we sort of looked at last week. And we've got some actuals numbers. So the system's already done half the battle for us, and then we're going to forecast some numbers out for the forecast. And we can use some spreads and some techniques to help pre-fill. So I can say pick last year's numbers, and I can say elevate by, say, 10% and push it across. And straight away, it's going to grab last year's number and added 10% to it. I might change my mind and say, you know what, September, that's not going to be 5,000. It's more like 6,500. I can come across the top of it. But then I might change my mind and say, you know what, I actually want to just set that to a certain value. So I can pick a set, and I can say, make it 500 across the board. And it's going to come over the top. So the difference here very quickly is we can go in multiple directions for the calculation. So around in a circle, saves a lot of time. So as we come down the page, we can do things, we can start to hook it up. We can say, let's make cost of goods our sales of goods times 50%. We just skim through quickly, and we can see that links up. And then we might say, let's set our payroll and expenses to 125. But our R&D, we might make that 10% of our revenue. So I can just pick revenue and go 0.1. Right, so very quickly, I've got a little basic forecast going there. So then the next step is, great, we've got a forecast. What are we going to do with it? So if we go back for a second. It's a bit of a mistake. Sorry, guys. Should have gone resume, not from the beginning. Maximize our value. So the next thing we want to do is to spread that out. So we've got the little spreadsheet that we just worked on. We can have lots of different users with that, but the focus of today is, okay, let's go and do something valuable with that. So we can push it out to a visualization layer. We can have some apps. So we're going to take a quick look at an app in a second. It's a simple app, but sorts of things that you'll want to look at in terms of being able to sort of home in on the information that you want to see. So it's one thing to be looking at a big grid of values in a spreadsheet. It's another thing to have something appropriate. The next step to that is process automation. So what does that mean? Well, things like approvals. So we're going to show a little quick example of an approval mechanism where we can tick a button. It's actually going to send an approval out to me, or an approval request, and it's going to come into my Teams application. Don't know if you guys use Teams at all, but it's going to send it to Teams, and it's going to send me an email requesting that. So if we go back again, sorry for the chopping and changing, but I'm going to bring the app up. And just for clarity, this app, I'm currently looking at that on my local laptop here in Sydney. And that spreadsheet that I just showed you actually is in the northeast of the US. So I'm already spreading data all around the world right now. So that in itself is a handy feature. So we create our little forecast. So if I come forward to say July forecast, and I can edit it. So this is a web application. There's nothing to do with Excel. And I can say, all right, I want to change my sales of goods from $500 to $5,000. And I push that in. It's going to go and write that back. So it's not just the app that updated. If I jump across to my spreadsheet in America and I press calculate, it updated the 5,000. Okay. And then the next part to it, if I push the information out even further, so it doesn't matter where I change it, but if I change that to 150,000, let's say, to really get things moving, I can now come across to a simple dashboard. And again, this isn't illustrative of the sorts of dashboards that you would use every day, but it's just an example. I can come and refresh that data, and very quickly, it's going to pull that information in live from the system. And you're going to say, Eric, why is that important? Well, you'll see when we create this, we're going to recreate this dashboard in a little bit later, but it means all of the numbers are tied together. My application, if it says it's 150,000 in the application, it's the same in the spreadsheet, it's the same in the dashboard. That's actually a really important feature. Well, I don't know about you guys, but if you've ever had experience where typically IT tends to build these things up slowly over time, and what happens is the logic embodied is separate in the applications, it's separate in the spreadsheets, it's separate in the dashboards. So my profit is 950,000 bottom line in my dashboard. The spreadsheet says it's 1,050,000, and my application says it's 2.1 million, because it depends on what rules of engagement were set up at the time. By using a modern tool, you can have that integrated together, and it saves that risk sitting in the back end. So if we go back to the sheet, and now we can look at the approval process, right? So this is an example of a data flow. So if I go request approval, it tells me that it was sent. That's great. And then in a second, it's going to come up down here and say that my Teams has received the message. Usually takes about 10, 15 seconds to come through. And this is the bit where I can start biting my nails, right, on the demo. And I think because I'm sharing, it's telling me that it's come through. And if I update, it's telling me that it's pending. And I got an email saying I had a forecast flow request for that particular department, and do I wish to approve or reject it? So it's done that automatically, and I can say, you know what, I'm going to approve it at this point. I'm going to say good to go submit. This has nothing to do with my spreadsheet or anything. It's a completely separate thing, and it's told me that it's done. It's sending an email out. You know, if I've got that set up, it would send one to David or to Tim or whoever and say, hey, I've approved it. The other thing that it's done, if I go back and refresh, it tells me that it was approved. It gives me the comment. And again, this is like an ultra simple example, but it's just highlighting that the data's changed in the back end. But from an operational point of view, that'd be a lot more sophisticated. So it'd be saying to you, you know, it would probably lock the data for a start. so that people can't continue to make changes, or it might snapshot the data to a separate version or scenario so that people can review and then approve if people need to make changes. But it'll also trigger other things. So there might be data events that come off the back of it. You might have management lists or dashboards that you want to run where to see if someone's finished their forecast, for example. All very important stuff. So I don't know anyone out there today, when you go through something like a large budget or a large forecasting cycle, and you've got, many people on your teams with separate spreadsheets going on, and you're trying to keep track of who's done what and when. Is it finished? Is it locked off? And how many times has it ever happened to you where you basically send the sheets out because there's some errors that need correction, and you make the assumption that nothing else is going to change except for the errors, and it comes back and you've got to go through it all again because somehow somebody copied the wrong bit, and all of those sorts of things. That gets eliminated when you've got something that's centralized, distributing the data like that. So then the next part we sort of touched on is the visualization components. So why do we want to visualize the data? Well, if we start off, here's a quick example from that little spreadsheet. Can we spot the forecast revenue outlier? Now we could sit there and look at it across the line, and we can see that there's 100,000 and the other ones are fairly low. That might be a problem. It might not be, but it's a little hard to see. Whereas if I compare that to a visualization, I can see that same 100,000 outlier very easily. I can be across the room and look at it and go, oh, that looks a bit weird. And that's the sort of thing where visualization comes to the fore. It brings some strength to the table. So the other side of it too is, not everyone in our business, like our teams, think of things in terms of data or super technical. Some people respond much better to having some visual stimulus about it. In fact, as people, our natural predisposition from our genetic makeup and history is to be able to analyze patterns, looking for food and things like that. So there's a natural analysis part in our minds to look for these sorts of things. So, okay, great. And some of you guys might have some dashboards, but here's an example of where visualizations and dashboards can go wrong. So, for example, we've got in this donut chart here, it's very busy. Like, it's impossible to see what exactly it's referring to, which account, because it's all compressed in. And these are sort of mistakes that people make at the start when they look at it and they think, oh, here's a cool widget, let's go and use that. And so it becomes more about showing off than the actual utility of the data. So I was sort of brought up on the school of thought that we have 5 fingers on one hand. So a graph should really represent something around 5. You can take it up to 8, but I think if you go past 8, you're really starting to put some trouble to yourself. People will start to look at it and lose the ability to see what it's meaning to convey. Similarly, things like these visualizations here, they're fairly similar, and so they don't really draw attention, or they don't really add too much to it, even though it's revenue and cost of sales. Another classic is things like maps. So maps are very cool to look at, but here I can see there's some activity in Japan. It doesn't tell me what it is, and I'm not quite sure what other entities should be active. So although it's telling me something, it's not perhaps as useful as it might be. Similarly here, this tree map, again, it looks colorful, and it's a pretty common one that you see around, and it definitely has its place. So don't think I'm dumping on any particular visualization or widget here, but some are better than others in different applications. Now, if we compare that to our simple example, yeah, it looks simple, but I can see in the entities, instead of the map, I can see that, roughly Singapore and Japan here are roughly half and half. I can see the cascade of my expenses and profits coming out of my revenue. It means a bit more. And same with the graph. I can feel it across time a little better. So it's just about structuring things in a way that's it makes sense. It's really about give the person what they need, but don't give them all the extra stuff. Just give them what they need. So that's a basic sort of rule of thumb with the visualizations. All right. Well, I guess we can move into the sort of the veil of self-service BI. So you'll hear this thing a lot out there where they talk about, oh, you know, it's self-service, you can take care of it yourself. And the reality is, unless you've spent 10,000 hours learning how to code a lot of these products, it's very difficult to get the data out, stage it up into something meaningful like a little simple dashboard, and send it on its way. So without further ado, let's take a quick run at that. So if I come back to my spreadsheet, and here I'm just going to use the Power Excel system here very quickly to create a view of data that I'm going to quickly pull into the dashboard. So it's not going to take too long. I'm going to start from scratch. So I'm going to pick the data set and financial data. I'll give us a little more room here so we can see what's going on. And I'm going to pull the months down. And I'm just using this tool, but there's other tools out there that can do this sort of thing. But this is a really easy tool to use. It's in Excel. And you'll see that the pivot table look here, it's something that people are quite familiar with. And so now I'm just going to go and pick the items that I want to use. So in terms of versions, I'm going to grab actual budget and forecast. And then the accounts, I'm going to go and pick the hierarchy. So I want anything under profit after tax. I'm going to check all descendants, drag them over. It gives me all the accounts. And the reason I'm doing it this way is because next week, when new accounts turn up, because I've picked it that way, they're actually going to come into this report. I don't have to go back and recode it. I don't have to worry about new things turning up. I can pick a grouping called details, which just gives me all the elements. We'll do that for these other ones. And it's the same reason. If new ones turn up, it's just a really easy way for the system to say, oh, you want them all, fine, take them. So, and then I'm just going to pick 3 years just because I feel like it. And then I'm going to send it. And so it's just created that report for me. It's got all the data I need. And then what I'm going to do is save it. So I'm just going to say Eric's dashboard data V2. And it's in the system. Now when I come across to a blank dashboard in Power BI, and again, it could be a different tool, but Power BI is our poison of choice today. So we're just going to say get data. This is a pretty quick run through. You know, obviously you probably have people on your teams that want to do this, but I'm just sort of showing that pretty much anyone can do this. So if you go connect, it's going to bring up a little list of things. Go to our data source, financial data, and there's Eric's dashboard data V2. And that's the information that we had. And that's as hard as it was to bring it into Power BI. I didn't have to write any code. I didn't have to write any formulae or anything. It's automatically going to connect the dots. And now I can start to create things. Okay, so I'm going to start off, because being visual is important. I'm going to put a little banner up just to make it look nice. If you're too fussy with it. Then we need to be able to pick what months and things that we want. So I'm going to do a chiclet slicer, and I'm going to drag months across. And it looks a little busy, so I'm actually just going to change that to 12 columns wide. It's a lot better. Just make it a little smaller. There we go. And then I'm going to move it up onto our banner, and then we'll make the background invisible. And that's the hardest part done. So now we can start making some graphs. So let's just start with the line graph, and let's do our revenue. So we can maximize that a little bit more. So what do I want to do? I want to put months across the bottom. I want to do actuals, budget. And you can see very quickly it's starting to come together. We're making a meaningful visualization. And then I might say, okay, I want to do that pie graph in the corner where we looked at the operating costs of the entities. And then if I go, we'll use forecast for this one and split it by entity. So this really is self-service. And you can see that it's not going to take an IT department or some sort of special project team 9 months to come up with the dashboard system that we need. We can, if we set the right foundations up with the engine in the back end, we can pretty much do anything with it and hand it over to people. And like we said before, it's going to be important that the numbers are the same. And because I'm using the numbers from the system, there's no separate logic in this dashboard that can get confused with any of the other numbers in the spreadsheets and things out there. So we'll use our forecast. And like I said before, see how that's really busy. Like it's not really telling me much information. So let's filter the accounts down here. And let's just pick cost of sales, GP, operating expense, and bottom line. That's a much more meaningful cascade of information to tell me about the fundamentals of what's going on in the business. And then if I want, I can do a table. And then here it's pretty simple. I'm just going to go account, do an actual versus budget versus forecast. And last but not least, I don't really have a way right now of picking years, so I'm going to pick another chiclet slicer, bring that down, and bring the years across into that. And so now I can say for 2021, for June, July, August, I can look at the data however I want to see it. And then I might want to look at it by entity. So last but not least, I'll put a slicer in there, just like a little pick list. Oh, I've grabbed the wrong one. There we go. And I'll put entity in there. And so now I can filter it by Japan or Singapore or both, however I want to see it. Now, the important feature of that is though, again, we've got our calculate, actually that needs to be filtered down to revenue. So let's do that very quickly. Bring an account across and I'm just going to pick revenue. So we pretty much, I don't know how long that took. It was a few minutes. Built a fairly decent dashboard from scratch. And now I can go back to those applications and things. I don't need that sheet anymore. I can delete that away. So for example, here I can change that back to 500 and my new dashboard is connected. It's not a one-time data set, it's live connected, and that peak is going to disappear there in July. Okay, so, you know, we've shown very quickly, and so we don't have a lot of time to go through it in greater detail, but it shows how, you know, from an analytical point of view for our executives, I can access this from a phone or a tablet. It's all connected. We've got that web application sample. That's all connected up. We can control the flows, all from having a connected set of BI tools. So we've sort of shown a little snippet out of a wide range of areas. And basically, in summary, I'll just from there, really modern BI tools can really change the way that we work in terms of our forecasts and budgets, but a wide range of data. It's not limited to financials. It really is a very important aspect of the business. As we're sort of beaten to death, we are using a central data model, which we sort of looked at last week and continued here. The visualization component, it really does help analysts identify those outliers. There's more sophisticated things we can do in terms of you know, filtering and using heuristics and machine learning components to analyze the data and sort of show, you know, which outliers are important. And the thing is, because we're using that central engine, we can do things with those outliers. So it's great that you might have an outlier in a visualization. It's even better if it's a severe outlier. It might exceed certain parameters, that it'll go and pop another one of those automation processes and send an email, or it'll put it up on someone's work task on their apps or whatever it is, and actually action something as soon as possible, rather than it sit on a dashboard waiting for someone to look at it. And the important aspect of it is to have real-time data. we really need access to it in such a way that you can action the information rather than waiting for an overnight process sometimes, or things like that. And the final aspect is it's important to have security and audit trail behind it as well. So that sort of ties it all in. So at that, David, that was a really quick push through, but if anyone's got any questions, or if you want to continue on.
Okay, thanks, Eric. That's great. By the way, it was 7 minutes to build your dashboard from scratch, in case you were wondering.
Not too shabby.
Okay. Sorry. Sorry, I need to upload. I need to share my screen. Hopefully you can see a graph on the screen. So we're going to talk about data.
Actually, we see an email, we don't see the graph. Just quickly, just before.
Sorry.
We see Outlook.
Sorry, let me do that again.
No problem. Just a quick comment to all. If you have questions also to Eric's presentation, we will then definitely pick your questions up in the panel discussion. I think that would be good.
Perfect.
Sorry. Let's try that again. Am I now sharing a graph?
Yeah, now it looks beautiful. It's beautiful.
Sorry.
Thanks, David.
Sorry for the hiatus there. I want to talk a little bit about other data sets which have real value, but actually which sit outside of the finance function, and in particular, market research. One of the reasons why Eric was able to build that dashboard in 7 minutes was because there's a very clear structure to the data in the finance model coming through, and you're able to have a chart of accounts, actuals, budgets, forecasts, a timeline, entities, all those sorts of things. Actually, the same is really true of market research projects and surveys, but people don't necessarily realize this. So what we're looking at here is a survey of about 1,800 or so corporates across small and medium-sized enterprises across Hong Kong, Malaysia, Singapore, and the Philippines. The interviews were generally with treasurers and CFOs, and they were asked who their main foreign exchange banking providers were, how they rated them, what proportion of their budget they spent with the primary provider, and all these sort of things. So what it leads to is an ability to benchmark your bank's performance and how they're going. Clearly, the banking relationship is very important for CFOs and treasurers, and sometimes there's quite a lot of dissatisfaction, and people think, well, should I switch? And it's not an easy decision to make. So what we can see on screen here, we're looking across this layer here, which says spot FX, forward FX, FX options, and FX provider, and these we can look at as products. We then have some other dimensions for country, the banking provider, where you can see a long list of banks, and some metrics, which are really kind of like a chart of accounts, if you think of it. We're looking at the primary market share percentage, secondary market share, share of wallet, and satisfaction. And then, of course, we've got a timeline going across the graph. So right here, we're looking at Standard Chartered and its primary market share, and we're looking at Hong Kong, Malaysia, Philippines, and Singapore. And we can move the cursor across this graph, and we can see the values changing. And just to be really clear, we've got the actual values in a table below. It's entirely interactive. If we want to change from Standard Chartered to, say, Citibank, we just put it in there, and the lines kind of quite cleanly redraw themselves. We can say, actually, what does it mean in terms of wallet share? And share of wallet going down in all markets. And in fact, you'd probably find that's pretty much the case for most of the providers in this particular case. The reason being that corporates tend to be spreading their spend around into more banking providers. So Standard Chartered wallet share also going down, HSBC the same. What's quite neat about this is because this is a 5-dimensional data set built in the type of software that Eric's been showing you, we can change the view and the graph can automatically redraw. So let's say we're just interested in Singapore, and we might be interested in looking at the 3 sort of big regional providers in Citibank, HSBC, and Standard Chartered, and we might be looking to see what customer satisfaction looks like. Well, they're all going up, but actually it's Standard Chartered that have the best performance. I should say that the customer satisfaction, a 5 is a terrible score and a 1 is a really good score. So a line going upwards means that the number is going smaller, if you see what I mean. Again, we can change from Singapore to Hong Kong, and the graph, we've just got to pick those same items again, and the graph kind of simply redraws. If I look at wallet share, as I said before, this is generally a downward trend. If I add Bank of China, you can see that their trend is going up, which is a little unusual. It's a bit more obvious if I take off HSBC and the axis changes a bit. But the point with this is really that you have a rich data set, and normally what happens with market research is that somebody downloads the file from the market research, draws a couple of pie charts, hands it across to a marketing person or a journalist who writes a couple of pages and maybe publishes a report on an internal newsletter, and the survey never sees the light of day again. You know, this is a living thing. It has a dynamic timeline. You can do whatever head-to-heads in the market you want to and compare. You know, in a domestic market like the Philippines, you can go Bank of the Philippine Islands, Philippine National Bank, BDO Unibank, and you can kind of see what's going on quite easily. And you can come to some very meaningful conclusions about whether your particular bank is one where satisfaction is going up, other people's maybe going down, and you know, it informs your very important decision making about whether or not you should be staying with a particular provider, or perhaps having a conversation with the bank either to switch to somebody else or maybe to negotiate better terms and conditions because it seems like everyone else in the market thinks your bank may be underperforming. So I'm going to leave it at that for the time being. That was just a very quick introduction to how you might use data visualization outside the finance function, perhaps in departments where large spreadsheets are not used every day, and it's easy to see things in a graph. But I think looking at a dynamically interactive set of graphs like that is a lot easier for people than trying to print perhaps hundreds of pages of PDFs of different views, which are static in nature. And even with a couple of hundred pages, you may not have the 1 or 2 views that are really, really important for you to interrogate that data set. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to bring in our panel. So Harry Ng and Michael Zimmel, as from last week. I'd just like to talk a little bit to you guys about the challenge of serving the C-suite with information in a format that they can understand. As we've discussed previously, people in the finance function often feel comfortable with a lot of numbers and in big spreadsheets, and they tend to assume that everyone else is as well, which, as we know, is probably not the case. So Harry, if I could ask you first of all, what's been your experience with the sort of quality of reporting that makes it to the boardroom table or the C-suite executives, and what worked well in your experience and what didn't work so well?
Well, thank you. I think I completely agree with you that from the C-suite's executive, they don't have time and patience to see all the details of the numbers. They would like to see a one-page summary that they can see what's going on in the business. So I think the dashboard does definitely help, and but I think the challenges is, as you said, the finance team would like to do a lot of number crunching and providing a lot of numbers to present, but and this is the gap between the executive and the accounting team. And the other challenges to the accounting team or the finance team is we might not have good tools to collect all the data. We don't have a good database to collecting all the necessary informations. So the executive might not happy with what the finance team produced to them. This is one of the challenges. But once you get all the informations put in place and having a one-page summary, I think that the executive will happy with that.
You're on mute, David.
Yeah, sorry, Michael, if I could ask you a similar kind of question. I mean, particularly you sat on sort of both in different seats around that C-suite boardroom table, both as a CFO and as a business owner. So how do you like to have information served to you and consume it?
Yeah, as you mentioned, I have the experience from both ends. I think the most important thing to start at the very beginning is to really define and work on what information is actually needed and how it's being used by the board. I feel that many companies don't spend enough time on that to actually have the dialogue and see what are you looking at, what are you trying to achieve with the data, and then you also need to balance on terms of timeliness. What data do you need fast? What data can wait? And once you have this kind of idea, what is actually needed to steer the company, or what the board is looking at, and also giving input from the BI and from the finance department, what is available, because very, very often not everyone is aware of the information that you can provide and what you can read into this. I guess this is then when you start building up your reporting. And in terms of reporting and data presentation, I see that as a pyramid. So at the very top, you have the real high-level executive summary that everyone in the board understands, that you can have a very quick look at. Then you know where you want to drill down. This is then where you go to the second level. That is likely still a graphical representation, and I'm very strong on that five-finger team that Eric mentioned. Don't overdo it with the graphs. Don't present too much information in the graph. If you then want to have that, then you dig deeper into the information. I guess that's an important part. And there is a balance between information presented pre-prepared and self-served information. The issue with self-serve BI really is you need to have a safe data set, like a sandbox that you can work with, where you don't run into the danger that you come to wrong conclusion because I have too complex of a data set where you do combinations of analysis that you probably shouldn't be doing. So select that kind of self-serve data set that people can work in, play around with, and then when they want to dig deeper, this is then again where the finance or the BI department comes in.
Okay, just like to touch a little bit on, I've got this view that a lot of market research spend gets wasted because, the data is not really presented in a way where you can get maximum value out of it. And equally, I think from what Harry was saying, the finance function quite often ends up doing quite a lot of rekeying because they don't necessarily have tools that allow you to connect these things together. In your experience, Harry, if people in the finance function or across the business, do people ever quantify kind of the cost of this inefficiency of having to rekey things, or, as you say, copy and paste things into PowerPoint slides because they don't have the connectors to get dynamic updates? Or do you have an estimate of the quantum of that kind of inefficiency?
Well, I think this is very key challenges and a big problem to finance team. To be honest, I think I used to be like spending 80% of the time to like we we doing everything. So we structures the numbers and copy and paste to the PowerPoint. This is a nightmare, to be honest. But I think the challenges is how we can link up the ERP system with the BI tools as well as the final products of the dashboard. This is very, very critical. And I think, as Michael said, I think getting to know what the user really need is very important. So I think finance, IT team, and the users needs to work together to come up with what kind of things that we want to see, what kind of data that we need to put into the sandbox. This is critical to make a good summaries of those data for the users. Otherwise, the BI tools won't be useful.
Yeah, I think in that sense also there's as you said, it's a pain to paste data back and forth. You have a data linkage, some you don't. I guess if you know what data is critical to have there quickly, then you know that is your main target to get it quickly. So in the past, what we had done, for example, we had daily alerts on the sales figures. They didn't look nice, but they were pretty much real time, and people could just they needed what they need to look at, and that's it. And then on the monthly reporting, you would have an aggregation of the number and a little bit more analysis, and that took some time in preparing the data as well. That would then be good for a board discussion, but for the daily decision making, it was just simply important that in the morning at 8 a.m. everybody has their sales data they can work with, and some KPIs calculated based on this. So this is where we made the decision that to just send out the alerts without much graphical work, whatever can be automated, and then the rest to spend more time on it.
Yes, I mean, I suspect there's very few companies that actually can measure this kind of thing. I mean, I've always felt that it's about what I call the 2 E's. It's effectiveness and efficiency. I mean, you have to be able to put the right information in front of the C-suite executives for them to be able to make the right decisions. And the rest of the workshop series will get into that decision-making point in more detail. But equally, you sometimes hear stories that in order to do that, you've got sometimes hundreds of really bright MBA type people spending all their time filling in Excel spreadsheets and never having any time to do the proper analysis on the numbers. So it's getting that balance between not spending a crazy amount of money on resources to generate this stuff, but also being able to provide the right service to the C-suite executive. I think the lesson learned that I've seen is that you've got to have the right sort of system, the right tools to be able to achieve that.
Yes, I might add to that as well. Make experiment as well. If you do your reporting, put in some new presentations, some new data, test how it works. Maybe do a quick workshop with the BI team where they show you different types of data where you can play around with it with different levels in the company. Do these kind of things where people see what data you actually have, what you can work with, and often through a 1-hour discussion where you go through different data sources and a really little of playing with correlations, showing people what there is, that very often will lead to ideas what else you can incorporate into your dashboard or even just in your monthly reporting. Because very often people are not aware of all the data that you have, and also sometimes people have to be educated what they can do with it. Very often I saw, okay, we have this, but I don't really know what I'm supposed to do with it until then someone else said, well, you could look at it this way, you could look at it that way. Why did you combine this set of the financial data with certain other market data. We have some competitive data, compare that. And this is then when ideas come, because the analysts, they don't know you're on the board level decision-making processes. And very often the board level doesn't know all types of detail of the data that you have.
I agree with Michael. I think this is exactly what happened. I did recently. We found that all the players are having different knowledge about the data and as well as what's the outcome that we want to be. So the communications amongst all the concerned parties are very, very important.
Yeah, you can test that, or you can play around in your reporting. You can reserve if you do a presentation type reporting, you can reserve one slide as your wildcard slide, which every month it can be something different. Present something else that you haven't presented before, and then see what is the feedback, whether people can use it. They may say, no, I can't use it. Then next month is something else. Or they say, yeah, this is great. We want to incorporate it into our pack. Actually, could replace that other page that we had. That just as an idea how to put this into practice.
Michael, David, if you allow me, Michael, because we discussed a lot about this topic, and you know that I'm coming from a different angle as well. Then the question then is a little bit, and also back to Harry and maybe David as well. When you say, okay, we need to bring the analysts, the power and the data and the capabilities of the analysts together with the need and the need and what the executive suite needs. So how can we do that? How can we bring these people together? What is your approach?
Well, I think the CEO, the CFO role play a very, very important in this whole process. The CFO needs to drive the connections amongst all the team members, including the executive and IT analyst. This is very, very important, I think.
Yeah, I've got one. Just got one thing to add to that. CEOs are very good at adding to reporting requirements. Something new's been launched, this has been done. They're not so good at actually stopping doing the things that you've always done. I've certainly found a few times in the past that actually if you just stop producing something that you think is a complete and utter waste of time and see if anybody notices, and quite often they don't. You've got to create some of that space to free up time so that the people who are good at analyzing the numbers can actually get on and do that analysis, which means stopping some of the production. If you're not able to automate the production through some of these tools and that kind of thing, you've really got to cut out some of the manual heavy lifting. Take things away from people and see if they complain. It's not a bad tactic.
I'd sort of extend that a tiny bit as well, where we often get stuck in a loop where we've done what's been traditional or what's been presented before. And to further Michael's concept there, definitely don't be afraid to step back and work out what it is that you want to analyze, what you need, because often what's been done is a limitation of the tools that we've had available to us. And when you take a step back and reevaluate the process and reevaluate what's important to you, that can actually free up a lot of time anyway, because to David's point, sitting there going through a lot of effort to report on numbers that doesn't really impact the business perhaps, that actually can free up bandwidth to really drive into more important aspects.
Yeah, very, very good point. That's when in the past we had our was monthly, sometimes every other month sessions with the BI team, where they would present what they're doing, what data they have, and really reserve maybe 20 minutes to 30 minutes for playing around with the data with different parts of the management team, to show them what there is, and then based on that, develop what kind of information is something that people want to see on a regular basis. Yeah, so this is a dialogue that you have to have regularly, because I think very good point, as Eric says, things develop. Today you might have data or you might have capabilities that you didn't have 6 months ago.
Yeah, definitely.
That's a little bit to the point of my question. I think it's all about collaboration and experimentation in order to not have a fixed mind, as David said. Let's just stick with what we have and actually reduce, right? Just take things away and see what happens. And I think that communication, this continuous collaboration and trying things out, I think that's important and gives a little bit of different mind to the finance team and different control.
Yeah, I mean, they talk about one of the great ways to innovate is to eliminate, right? So I kind of think we need to apply that to the finance function and take away some things that are just too old school or a waste of time. No one's using it. You get the same in editorial functions as well. You know, journalists write the same old stories that they've always written. It's only when you really look into the data and see that no one's reading it that you wonder why on earth you're bothering to spend money on all this reporting and writing articles. So I would encourage people to be constantly thinking about, is there a better way? Do we need all of this stuff? Is it still relevant today? And as they say, you can't make an omelette without breaking some eggs. So don't worry too much about upsetting a few people. If there's any questions from anybody on the call, please raise your hand or send through an email. You can write to me at david.newton@trinitybridge.asia, or I think you can probably find ways to ping us on LinkedIn or other various social media tools. But I think we ought to be thinking of wrapping it up. We're getting very close to 10:30. In 2 weeks' time, Tim's going to be leading the session on decision making. And in 4 weeks' time, he's going to be leading the session on change management. So hopefully, if it wasn't apparent before, it's now fairly clear how these topics sort of link together and hopefully come together in a coherent story. But I hope today's session has been interesting and provoked a few thoughts. And please reach out. I've had 1 or 2 comments from people between the sessions that we've had so far, but we are available. You know, if you want to bounce any thoughts or questions or ideas off us, then please do ask a question. I say either over email on the CFO Connects portal or LinkedIn or whatever suits you. So I think we'll wrap it up here, and hopefully we'll see you all again in 2 weeks.
Thanks a lot, David. Thanks a lot, everybody. And yeah,
Thank you.
Very happy to see you in 2 weeks. Have a great day.
Cheers all.